Welcome, viewers, to the series Exploring Careers in Data Analytics. My name is Brianna Gua, 2024.5 at Middlebury College, and I would like to introduce this episode's guest speaker. I'm joined today by Alec MacMillen, 14, Voter Protection and Insights Analyst with the Democratic National Committee, or the DNC. Welcome, and thank you for joining us, Alec.
Thanks so much. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah. Alec, this series explores a number of different professional roles involving data analytics. Tell us a little bit about the work you do with the DNC.
Sure. So I am the data analytics and data engineering specialist for the Civic Engagement and Voter Protection Department at the DNC. The department mostly consists of lawyers who design and implement voter protection programs. And the department's overarching goal is to ensure that every eligible voter who wants to vote in an American election can successfully do so. So we run a lot of programs, including a national voter protection hotline for help resolving issues in voting. We have a national poll observer program. We also have a lot of voter registration and education resources and drives that we put together for voters. So I manage the data work that underpins those programs and helps our lawyers make decisions about how to design those programs, how and where to allocate resources, and then also understand how those programs are performing.
Yeah, so how exactly, just getting a little bit more into the specifics, how exactly would you collect data for what you do?
Sure.
So those recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. So we take in data from a very wide variety of sources, right? So one of those sources is the voter file. So every state maintains a register of all of the eligible voters in the state, and it has information on the voter's name, location, sometimes demographics. So that's a big source of data that we use. We also have a couple of platforms that we've developed to take in data from the volunteer programs that we run. So if someone calls a voter protection hotline and has a question or reports an issue, we have volunteers that enter that data into a system that captures all of that and then sends it to a data warehouse that we can access sort of on the back end to understand what's going on when people are having issues voting. And we also take in data from sometimes commercial firms that have more information about individual folks, really a wide variety of sources. And then we all sort of we coalesce it into one place that we can bring those disparate sources together.
And what programming languages do you use?
So a huge function of my job is reporting. So we'll look at KPIs or key performance indicators for programs that we're running. So a lot of the work that I do on a daily basis is in SQL. So writing SQL queries against our data warehouse to pull down data into a neatly formatted response. And then oftentimes I'll use visualization software like Google Data Studio to put together something like a dashboard that I can show to folks who are running the programs or designing the programs. This is how we're doing, this is how many volunteers we've recruited or issues that we've solved, and have that information be accessible in a more informative way than just being in a big table.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like you do like a good amount of, data analysis and then also presentations. Could you speak a little bit more to like that balance of doing work sort of on your own and then also in more of a group setting?
Absolutely. So I work with, as I mentioned, lawyers who don't necessarily have a technical background in understanding statistics or probability or coding or numbers. And so a huge part of what I do is taking qualitative asks from folks who are designing program and then translating that into data work that answers the questions that they're getting at, and then bringing it back to them and trying to present it in a way that's going to make sense for them. So I could write a beautiful SQL query and create this gorgeous dashboard of information, but if it's not answering the questions that people who are actually designing and implementing program are asking, then the work doesn't really have an impact, right? So a huge part of what I do on a daily basis is thinking about how can I use my skills to translate insights into interpretable conclusions for folks to actually make decisions off of. So it's a huge give and take. I have skills that I can bring to the role, but I also need to constantly be listening to and thinking about what my stakeholders need from me.
And what would you say is the most interesting part of your work?
Yeah, great question. So I'm fortunate enough to get to work with really incredible data. We have a really great data engineering team here that curates so many different sources of data and makes them available to us to use. I'm also fortunate in that the lawyers that I work with are really, really interesting, capable, fascinating, smart people who have all these great ideas about how we can expand access to the ballot box for Americans of all backgrounds. And getting to learn from those folks and then contribute in some small way back to the work that they're doing is a very inspiring thing to get to do on a daily basis.
Yeah. And then I guess on the flip side, what do you find most challenging about your work?
Yeah, it's very it's heavy subject matter, right? So this is a very difficult time for voting rights in America for a lot of different reasons. And so oftentimes there can be a lot of pressure to get things right and get things done quickly. And working in politics in general, the ebb and flow of your work is so closely tied to the electoral calendar. So during election seasons, time commitment goes way up, the stress level goes up, and then it sort of recedes right after an election is passed. So I would say that's pretty common to working in politics in general, but I would say those are the most challenging things.
Yeah, I mean, you're just mentioning how like there's sort of that ebb and flow, and are you seeing any of that happening right now as the midterm elections are coming up?
Yeah, absolutely. So, after the 2020 election, there was an opportunity to sort of exhale, take stock of the work that we had done in 2020, make plans for the next cycle. 2021 was all about putting the foundation in place for that work. And now that we're into 2022 and the primaries have started to amp up, this is where the rubber starts to meet the road. And we're working to actually implement all the things that we've been. So yes, I think, now from March of 2022 all the way up until November, we're going to be in sort of an accelerating pace of work.
I think that was very interesting. So thank you for sharing all of these insights. I'm curious about your own experience from campus to career. So at Mid, you majored in international politics and economics. Tell us the rest of your story. What clubs were you a part of and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was at Middlebury, I was in an a cappella group, co-ed a cappella group. I was in the Bobolinks. That was a great experience and still something that I look back on very fondly. I served on the academic judicial board in my senior year. That was a really enlightening experience. Also was involved in a few other clubs, but those are probably the two most significant things I was involved in. And as you mentioned, I was an IP&E major. Studied abroad in Egypt in my junior year. The language that I studied was Arabic and did Middle East studies classes. And yeah, that was sort of my time at Middlebury. I think I was oriented towards my current path a little bit later in my Middlebury career. I took a regression analysis class in my junior year with Professor Caitlin Myers, who's in the econ department. Huge fan, loved that class, and ended up taking her empirical economic research class, which I think is Econ 212. I'm not sure if they've changed it, but I think that's what the class was when I took it. And I think it was my senior fall, so fall of 2013. And I think it was the first time the course had been offered, but I absolutely loved it. I loved reading econ papers, replicating the work that the authors had done in this data. And that was the first time when I thought to myself, I really like this stuff. I really like quantitative coding. And this is something that I can see myself doing more of in the future. So I would say that was kind of my formative Middlebury experience.
Yeah. Did you come into Middlebury having an idea of sort of what you already wanted to do, or was it just like you were just coming in and figuring things out?
I was definitely coming in and figuring things out. I knew that I had enjoyed math courses in high school, but I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to go down, a hard math path. Took some econ courses in my first year, took some poli-sci courses in my first year, enjoyed them both. Decided that I wanted to try taking a non-Romance language. I had studied Spanish in high school, and so I knew I wanted to branch out a little bit from there. Tried Arabic and really loved it. And so the IP&E major was really appealing to me because I was able to bring in courses and experiences from poli-sci, from econ, and then from Arabic also under one major. And I don't think that I really had a firm idea of what I was interested in doing until pretty late in my Middlebury career, like, junior, senior years, when things started to coalesce a little bit more.
Yeah. And then how was it getting your first job out of Middlebury?
Yeah, so I had a slightly unusual experience. When I graduated from Middlebury, my first year out, I actually did a Fulbright fellowship in Jordan. And that was a great experience because I was able to use my training in Arabic. I was also working as an economic research assistant in Jordan. So there was a professor at the University of Illinois who was running a development economics field study in Jordan, and then I was one of his field research assistants on the ground in Amman. So that was my first year out of Middlebury, and that was a great experience because it felt like a capstone to everything I had done in my IP&E major. But it also, I think, confirmed for me that while it was a great experience, that one particular field was not really where I wanted to make my longer term career. So after my Fulbright, I came back to the United States, and my first job was as a essentially like a policy research assistant, like a budget analyst at the Congressional Budget Office here in Washington, D.C. And I knew I wanted to be in Washington, D.C. for the politics and the policy kind of realm. And getting that first job in policy analysis kind of felt like a step beyond what I had been doing previously, but still related because I was still working with economic policy. I was still getting to do some coding in SAS and Stata. And it gave me time to say, this is what I'm interested in right now. And this is a step towards where I think I want to be in the future, but I can also kind of reassess and think through my options.
Yeah. Were there any like classes at Middlebury that you found really, you did mention the empirical questions class earlier, are there any other courses you recommend for people who are interested in either public policy or data analytics?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely want to reiterate my extremely positive experience taking, I think it was Econ 211 and 212 with Professor Myers. That was huge. I think now I believe Middlebury is offering more data science specific courses that I think were not offered when I was there. So I would be really intrigued by those and encourage people to look into them. I think one thing that I've also learned is that you can never have too much math if you're interested in doing anything quantitative. So I took linear algebra at Middlebury, and that was another great class that was important that I've used a lot in my time since then, especially when I started getting more into machine learning. I would recommend that anyone who's interested in doing anything quantitative, definitely, even if you're not a math major, taking math classes like linear algebra or differential equations, anything sort of upper level, that will only help you. And math is one of those things that you can apply it anywhere, no matter what your substantive area of interest is. If you're interested in doing any kind of analytical work, any kind of data science, having those hard math classes is really, really, really going to help you. And honestly, that's one thing I wish I had done more of at Middlebury.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's currently considering whether or not to take linear algebra, that is a great thing to hear. I know what I will be doing next semester. And so how is what you're doing now at the DNC different from other roles that you did previously, like the public research thing, or what you were doing even before that?
Sure. So when I was working in Jordan, a lot of what I was doing was administering a study that was being implemented in the field. So it was a lot of overseeing of folks that we hired to go out and give this essentially survey to folks in Jordan. So it was a lot of administrative work, and then it was a lot of taking in experimental data, cleaning it, preparing it for analysis, and working with the PI, the primary author on the case. Then when I came back and was working at the Congressional Budget Office, I was doing much more policy analysis. So at the CBO, essentially what we would do is we would look at laws that were proposed in Congress and analyze their predicted impact on the federal budget. So it was a lot of understanding how the federal budget process works and how Congress uses the power of the purse. So that was a very sort of specific and narrowly tailored job. What I do now is a little bit more broad in the realm of data analytics. I think it's a little bit more of a traditional role in the sense that I can say, yes, I do data analysis, which includes reporting on programs. I do a little bit of data engineering, which involves setting up ETL or extract, transform, load pipelines that sort of process and clean data. And then there's a little bit of predictive and exploratory data science in there too. So I think my role now is a little bit more of a traditional data role than other jobs that I've had in the past.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool. And what role, if any, do advanced degrees like master's or graduate school or technical certifications play in this space?
That's a great question. So for me personally, because I was an IP&E major, I had had a little bit less of the traditional math and coding training than a lot of other folks who are in the space. And so that actually is the reason that I decided to go back and get my master's degree. 4 years after I graduated from Middlebury, I went to actually a really great program at the University of Chicago. It's called the MS in Computational Analysis and Public Policy. So it's a blend of traditional public policy, which includes econ and stats, but then also has a sort of harder core computer science, databases, machine learning aspect to it. And I had some of the econ and stats training from Middlebury, but didn't have more of the harder computer science side of things. And so that degree was a great experience for me because I was able to level up my harder core technical skills and say, I want to make this pivot to doing a little bit more hands-on technical work where I'm working in SQL, but also working in Python and R and doing a little bit more, I would say, technically savvy work. I don't think that that is a requirement for working in the space, especially if you have, a little bit more of a firmer background in those things from undergrad, like if you're a math or a CS major. I don't think it's required. For me, it made sense just because of my background and where I wanted to go. So I think it's a nice to have, but definitely not an absolute must, depending on what your background is.
Okay, but at that point in time, you knew what you wanted to do in the future, and you knew that to do that, you would have to go and get a master's in.
Yeah, exactly. Like I knew that it would help me to have a firmer grounding in computer science and machine learning than I personally had. And the fastest and sort of most surefire way to get that experience was to go get a master's.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you for sharing your experiences. Given your experiences and what you know now, what advice can you give to current students how to best prepare themselves for entry points in this career field, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the really important things that you can do is find ways to demonstrate your genuine interest in working in the field. And that can happen even before you have your first job or your first internship. Even when you're in classes and working on projects, being mindful about how you could in the future present the work that you're doing in a job interview can be really, really helpful. I found it really helpful when I was in grad school to think about all of my classwork, especially the projects that I was doing, as building a sort of early portfolio that I could talk about and show off to potential future employers. And when you think about your work in those terms, it becomes a lot more tangible and a lot more sort of immediately engaging, in my view. So always thinking about the work that you're doing as being part of a larger whole. You're not really doing anything in isolation. You're taking classes that, someday you will finish and leave behind, but you also want to view those classes and the projects that you're doing as building blocks towards something larger. And then I think the other big thing is just networking. And networking doesn't have to be this big, scary thing where you're cold calling or emailing all those people. I know that Middlebury has amazing resources that students can take advantage of for reaching out to alums in the career field. And I found in my own personal experience that if you reach out to folks, whether or not they're in the Middlebury network, if you reach out to folks with a very clearly defined ask for them, and it's clear that you have done your homework and done your preparation in advance of reaching out to them, the vast majority of folks are going to be really, really happy to share with you their knowledge, share with you their time, talk to you about what they do. And so I think not being afraid to leverage those connections is also really important.
And what skill sets are important to have when you're pursuing a career in data science and even more than just like programming, right? I know earlier you were talking about presenting and having interpersonal skills as well. So what would you say are some important skills to have?
Yeah, I think you make a great point about presentation and communication. As I said earlier, I can build the world's most beautiful dashboard, but if it's not designed in such a way that my stakeholders can understand it, they'll never use it. And all of that work is, it's basically wasted. And so when you're in a data science role, you want to think about what is the logical endpoint for my work? Who is going to be using it? What are they going to be using it for? How can I make it in such a way that it has the most impact? And so being able to have that empathetic interpersonal communication style where you can see where someone else is coming from and what they are hoping to get from your work, that's huge. I think for folks who don't have as much technical expertise, the words data science can be a little bit of a black box, like it's some sort of magical tool that we can just wave a magic wand and all of our problems are solved. And of course, we know that that's not true. So how do we communicate to folks the limitations of data science, but then also what we can actually do with it. So that's one thing. The other big thing I would say is that you have to be willing to be a lifelong student. And once you graduate and are in the workforce, I think when I was younger, I thought, great, once I graduate, I'll know everything that I need to know, and I will never have to learn everything ever again. And nothing could be farther from the truth. You are always constantly going to be learning, whether it's new statistical or mathematical concepts, a new coding language. It could be anything. You have to have this attitude where you are constantly curious, constantly challenging yourself. And I think also really staying humble and being honest with yourself about what you do and don't know. And just have this attitude that you're never too experienced or too old to learn, and just keeping that hunger for new knowledge alive is what I would say.
Yeah, that's really great. And then would you say in data science, like what's a good entry level to this career field, right? Like, would that be doing internships, taking more computer science classes? Like, how would a Middlebury student break into this field?
Yeah, I think that internships are really, really great ways to get your feet wet, especially now that the career field is a little bit better established than it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, when data science was a little bit of a newer concept, at least in the professional setting. I think internships are really great, especially if you can find an internship at a place that's doing work that aligns with your values or your interests. Mm-hmm. So in the summer between the 2 years of my master's degree, I did a data science internship at the ACLU, which was a really great experience because I was really interested in the work that the ACLU was doing. And because I was interested in the substantive subject matter of the work, I found myself more willing and more engaged in applying myself on the data science side of things to feed back into the subject matter work that we were actually doing. So I think finding internships in areas that are interesting to you is really important. I know that Middlebury students are incredibly busy and have a ton of demands on their time, but if you ever have the opportunity to maybe spruce up a project that you did for class and create a little bit of a professional portfolio, I think that makes a huge difference too. Like, when you're applying to entry-level roles, a lot of times what you'll see on job applications is that they'll have a place for you to put a link to your LinkedIn profile, but there also might be one for an online portfolio or like a GitHub account. And I think that even if you don't have, you don't have to be making groundbreaking discoveries or putting together like Pulitzer Prize winning level analyses on your GitHub. But if you have some project that you can show and put on your GitHub and say, hey, like, this is code that I've done. It's open source. You can look at it. You can see that I have interest in this subject matter beyond just applying for your job. I think little things like that can go a really, really long way.
Yeah. And how should students best like find internships or doing such projects while at college?
Yeah, so on the internship side, I think definitely leverage the resources that your career office has for you, because I know that those are great. What I also oftentimes do is I will just make a list of organizations that I know of that do work that I'm interested in, and literally just go troll through their web pages, looking at their career postings, because sometimes, career postings that you might be interested in don't make it onto a website. Like, is it Handshake that Middlebury uses? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you have to also be willing to step beyond that and just, do a little bit of extra searching yourself. I think in terms of personal projects, I think repurposing class projects, if your professor is okay with it, of course, is great. I think if you are a technically inclined person and you can ever like contribute to a public GitHub repository with some sort of code and show that you can collaborate with other folks out there working on interesting problems, that's huge. I think it's essentially, you want to think about, I hesitate to say branding yourself because I think it has such a connotation, but you want to think about building a body of work that represents you and your interests and where you want to go, so that when a recruiter or someone who's a hiring manager is looking at your application for something, they can say, yes, I understand it, that this is what this person is about. I see that they're interested in what we're doing. I see that they have the skills, and that's what's going to make you stand out.
Yeah. Alec, thank you once again for your engagement with us and helping students prepare for their first career destinations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this concludes the episode within the series, Exploring Careers in Data and Analytics. In closing, I want to encourage viewers to tune in to get career perspectives and advice from a number of professionals in a broad variety of organizations in our other episodes in this series. I also want to encourage you to tune in to other MIDDVantage series, which can be accessed through the Events and Programs tab on the CCI website. Thank you again for watching.